Somewhere inside you, right now, sitting in your own cells, there's a set of instructions that weren't written by a human, not metaphorically, literally not human. If your ancestors came from outside Africa, a real measurable slice of your DNA came from a different species entirely, one that hasn't existed for 40,000 years. It's still in there, quietly doing things, whether you've ever thought about it or not. This isn't speculation. In 2010, an international team led by geneticist Svante Pääbo published the first full draft of the Neanderthal genome, sequenced from ancient bone fragments, and compared it directly against modern human DNA. What they found surprised a lot of people, including many scientists who'd assumed Neanderthals were a fully separate branch that left no genetic trace behind. Instead, the comparison showed clear evidence of interbreeding. People with ancestry outside Africa carry measurable amounts of Neanderthal DNA today, typically somewhere between 1 and 4% of their genome, depending on the specific population and how it's measured. That geographic split isn't random, and it tells its own part of the story. Modern humans evolved in Africa and began migrating outward roughly 60 to 70,000 years ago. Neanderthals, meanwhile, had already been living across Europe and parts of Asia for hundreds of thousands of years by that point, fully adapted to those environments. The interbreeding happened after modern humans left Africa and encountered Neanderthal populations already established there, which is exactly why populations with deep African ancestry alone typically carry little to no Neanderthal DNA, while populations descended from that outward migration do. This discovery didn't stay a niche curiosity either. In 2022, Svante Pääbo was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, specifically for his work sequencing the Neanderthal genome and uncovering this history of interbreeding with modern humans. It's a genuinely rare honor for a purely genetic, historical discovery like this one, and it reflects just how significant the scientific community considered the finding. Not just a fun fact about ancient relatives, but a fundamental correction to the story of how modern humans actually came to exist. The species we'd long assumed simply vanished, replaced entirely by our own, turned out to still be partly here, folded into the genome of billions of people alive today. Here's where it gets genuinely strange. This isn't just inert leftover genetic material sitting around doing nothing. Researchers have traced specific Neanderthal-derived gene variants to real, measurable effects in people alive today. Some variants are linked to skin and hair pigmentation, likely inherited adaptations for living at higher latitudes with less sunlight. Others affect immune system function, possibly helping early modern humans respond to pathogens that Neanderthals had already been dealing with for tens of thousands of years in that environment. Some studies have even linked certain Neanderthal variants to differences in pain sensitivity, blood clotting, and sleep patterns. One especially concrete example comes from a 2023 study that traced a specific Neanderthal-derived genetic variant to nose shape, specifically to a taller, more protruding nose bridge in people who carry it today. Researchers believe this shape may have originally helped Neanderthals warm and humidify cold, dry air more efficiently before it reached the lungs, a genuinely useful adaptation for the Ice Age European climates they lived in. It's a strange thing to sit with. A detail as personal and specific as the shape of someone's nose can trace directly back to a different species, inherited through a specific ancestor who lived tens of thousands of years ago, still visibly present on a face today. Not every inherited variant turned out to be helpful, though. Some Neanderthal-derived gene variants have been linked to increased risk for certain modern health conditions, including some studies connecting specific variants to higher risk of depression, nicotine addiction, and blood clotting disorders. One especially striking 2020 study identified a Neanderthal-derived gene variant on chromosome 3 associated with a meaningfully higher risk of severe illness from COVID-19, carried by a substantial percentage of people in parts of South Asia and Europe. An adaptation that may have helped a Neanderthal immune system handle one ancient environment doesn't necessarily translate cleanly into every challenge a body faces tens of thousands of years later. This raises an obvious question. If some of these variants carry real risks, why are they still around at all? Part of the answer is that evolution doesn't require a trait to be purely beneficial, only that it doesn't get eliminated fast enough to disappear, especially if it also carries some advantage elsewhere. A Neanderthal immune system variant that helped early modern humans survive unfamiliar diseases in a new environment could easily be worth the trade-off of a modern health risk that wouldn't even become relevant for tens of thousands of years. Genetic variants also don't arrive labeled as good or bad. They simply exist, get passed down if they don't prevent someone from having children, and get evaluated by circumstances that shift constantly over deep time. Natural selection responds to the pressures of the moment, not to consequences that are still tens of thousands of years away. The amount of Neanderthal ancestry isn't evenly spread across every population either. East Asian populations tend to carry a slightly higher percentage of Neanderthal DNA than European populations, somewhere around 20% more by some estimates, which researchers think may reflect a second, separate wave of interbreeding as modern humans continued migrating further east. Sub-Saharan African populations, by contrast, typically carry little to no Neanderthal ancestry at all, since their ancestors largely didn't take part in the out-of-Africa migration where that interbreeding occurred. None of this maps onto any simple story. It reflects a genuinely complicated branching migration history still being pieced together. Neanderthals aren't even the only ancient human relatives that left a genetic mark. In 2010, the same research group identified an entirely separate group now called the Denisovans, known almost entirely from a handful of bone fragments and a single tooth found in a Siberian cave, yet genetically distinct enough to be identified as their own population. Modern populations in parts of Southeast Asia and Oceania, particularly in Papua New Guinea, carry up to 4 to 6% Denisovan DNA, including a variant linked to efficient oxygen use at high altitude found in Tibetan populations today. Your genome may be carrying instructions from more than one vanished human relative at once. It's worth being precise about what this actually means, since the headline number gets exaggerated easily. Carrying 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA doesn't mean you're part Neanderthal in any meaningful, cartoonish sense, and it definitely isn't evidence for any of the racial pseudoscience that sometimes tries to piggyback on this research. Every non-African human population carries a broadly similar range of this ancestry, inherited from encounters that happened tens of thousands of years ago, long before any modern population or ethnic group existed in anything like its current form. The specific percentage also isn't a ranking of anything. A slightly higher or lower number doesn't make anyone more or less human, more or less evolved, or more or less anything else that might be tempting to read into a single statistic. This is a shared, universal feature of being human today, not a dividing line between different groups of humans. Step back far enough and this stops being a strange trivia fact and starts looking like something closer to a quiet reminder. The line between us and them, that felt so obvious for most of the 20th century, modern humans on one side, Neanderthals as some other, lesser thing on the other, turns out to have been considerably blurrier than anyone assumed. We didn't just replace them. In some real, measurable, biological sense, we absorbed them, and a piece of that history is still quietly doing something inside your own cells today, whether or not you ever think about it. The next time someone jokes about being part caveman, there's a real chance they're closer to right than they realize. It's a strange thing to carry around, a piece of a vanished species written into your own biology, showing up in your skin, your immune system, maybe even the shape of your nose. That's exactly the kind of hidden thread this channel exists to dig up. If you want more of these, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.